Textbook for B.Ed. Course, Education Basics in NCERT. Basics in Education. Textbook for B.Ed. Course NCERT. Basics in Education. Textbook for B.Ed. Course. ISBN 97893 5007 All. What is education? What is its primary purpose and what is not? Which approaches support it and at which levels of cognition? So many basic questions that many of our trained teachers, among others, ask, and very few afford to discuss the limited responses they have found so far. Therefore, the need for a book of this kind on basic concepts and introductions to various relevant theories was felt. The present textbook, Basics in Education, is related to one of the core components of the two-year B.Ed. program introduced by NCERT recently. It aims to help the student teachers understand and analyze diverse concepts related to education, their premises and contexts. It discusses crucial concepts like the nature and goals of education, the processes of education, different forms of knowledge in the process of knowing, organization of knowledge in school curriculum, autonomy of the teachers and the learners, and the role of education in inculcating values among children. The textbook has been written in a self-instructional format, which provides the student teachers with considerable scope for engaging in the processes of inquiry, critical analysis, and intellectual discourse. Each chapter, in addition to the relevant content, carries learning checks, activities, summary, review questions, and references/further readings, providing opportunities to the student teachers to engage with those concepts. As you go through it, you will see that the material reflects and propagates inclusiveness too. The NCERT gratefully acknowledges the joint effort of all the educationists involved in preparing this material, and particularly Professor Parati Bavekya for reviewing it. We hope that the book will be a meaningful resource to student teachers, teacher educators, and all stakeholders in the schooling systems in our country. We would appreciate receiving feedback from you to bring further improvements in the book, which can be sent to the editor of the book, Professor A.K. Srivastava, email ashok.srivastava@yahoo.com. P. Arvind S. Sinclair, Director, New Delhi National Council of Educational, June 2014. Research and Training, IVDs, T. X-Book, D. Development, T. M. Contributors, Chanchal Goel, Lecturer, District Institute of Education and Training, Pitampura, New Delhi. Email achanchalguptan, redifmail.com. Chapter 7, Dayapant, Professor and Head Department of Educational Psychology and Foundations, National Council of Educational Research and Training, New Delhi, email.head@redifmail.com. Chapter 10, G. L. Arora, Professor and Head, Radid, Department of Teacher Education, National Council of Educational Research and Training, New Delhi. Email ararag1@redif. On tense, Foreword 3, 1. Concept and meaning of education. 1 to 2. Goals of education 42. On tense, Foreword 3, 1. Concept and meaning of education. 1, 2. Goals of education 42. See on tense, Foreword 3, 1. Concept and meaning of education. 1, 2. Goals of education 42. Foreword 3, 1. Education. 1, 2. 42. See on tense, Foreword 3, 1. Concept and meaning of education. 1, 2. 2. Goals of education 42. 3. Processes and modes of education. 71. 4. Knowledge, meaning, and facets. 91. 5. Process of knowing 112. 6. Organization of knowledge in schools 135. 3. Processes and modes of education. 71. 4. Knowledge, meaning, and facets. 91. 5. Processes and modes of education. Processes and modes of education. Modes of education. 71. Modes of education. 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 7. Knowledge, meaning, and facets. 91. 5. process of knowing 112, organization of knowledge in schools, 100, organization of knowledge. Etymological meaning, narrow and broader, meaning education as process and product concept, and meaning of education according to Indian thinkers. Western views on education, analytical concept of education. Whether education is natural or a social process. Whether education is intentional or unintentional. What does education comprise of? Does education occur only in educational institutions? Let us sum up review questions. References. B.A.6 in education. I. Introduction. The term education is a very common and a popular word that is uttered by many of us, but understood by a very few in its right perspective. It is in one way or the other appears to be as old as the human race, though during the course of time, its meaning and objectives have inevitably undergone certain changes. As a student of education course and as a future teacher, it is essential for you to understand the meaning of education, its conceptual features and different perspectives that have shaped its meaning from time to time. Understanding the concept of education and its dynamic features will help you to develop insights about the purpose of becoming a teacher and help you while educating your students. This chapter analyzes different perspectives and views of Indian and Western thinkers on education. The contemporary meaning of education is discussed here from analytical viewpoints. Education as a natural and a social process, and also education as an intentional activity, are discussed with suitable illustrations. The different processes of education and understanding the role and the need of institutions in educating the individuals are also examined by drawing relevance to school context. Objectives. After going through this chapter, you will be able to analyze various perspectives and views on the concept of education. Explain the concept of education as an initiation process in the Western and Eastern perspectives. Explain the concept of education as a worthwhile activity in the context of school education. Differentiate between education as a natural process and as a social process with suitable illustrations. Understand the dimensions of education and their relevance. Understand the role and the need of institutions in educating the individuals. See concept and the meaning of education. Education. You are by now familiar with the term education, educated person, educating, and so on. You must have also used these terms on several occasions in conversation with others. What do we mean by education? Does teaching or instructing become education, or is it learning in an institution? Does developing the child into good human being known as education? Is it possible to have one meaning of education? There are many more such questions that come to our mind when we attempt to understand the concept of education. The term education has been interpreted by different people in different ways. Some people refer to it as formal schooling or to lifelong learning. Some others refer to it as acquisition of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Some say that education is nothing but training of people's mind in a particular direction to bring about desired changes. If you ask a statesman, an artisan, a teacher, a parent, a philosopher, and a student about what education means to them, you would be surprised to know the multiple interpretations and views people have about education. This only shows that education doesn't have one precise, universally accepted definition. It has various meanings with various functions. Analysis of these meanings would help us to understand what education really is. To begin with, let us look into how the term education has evolved in some of the views of great thinkers that exemplifies the concept and meaning of education. Etymological meaning. Etymologically speaking, the word education is derived from the Latin word educare, meaning to raise and to bring up. According to few others, the word education has originated from another Latin term educere, which means to lead forth or to come out. These meanings indicate that education seeks to nourish the good qualities and draw out the best in every individual. Education seeks to develop the innate or the inner potentialities of humans. Some other educationists believe that the word education has been derived from the Latin term educatum, which means the act of teaching or training. The meanings of these root words lead us to believe B.A.6 in education, that education aims to provide a nourishing environment that would facilitate or bring out and develop the potentialities in an individual. If you refer to Dictionary of Education, edited by C.V. Good, 1973, you will find that education is defined as the aggregate of all the processes by which a person develops abilities, attitudes, and other forms of behavior of practical values in the society in which he lives. The social process by which people are subjected to the influence of selected and controlled environment, especially that of the school, so that they may obtain social competence and optimum individual development. The concept of education has been used in a variety of contexts with different meanings. To give a precise definition of education, just as we define certain concepts in science or other technical subjects, is difficult, as there is no one meaning of education held in common by people. Let us try to explore the different meanings and viewpoints on education. Understanding these conceptions would help you to analyze the kind of education that is in vogue now and to what extent it is justified. Narrow and broader meanings of education. Narrow meaning of education. You must have come across people who consider that instruction imparted in schools and higher education institutions is nothing but education. The aims of education in these contexts are measured in terms of degrees or certification or promotion. There is a deliberate effort made with a definite purpose to develop certain amount of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and habits in these institutions. This is a narrow concept of education, which is confined only to a few specific, deliberate, and planned efforts that have a bearing on the development of the individual. The educator, in the narrow sense, aims at producing the literate or a professional person, such as an engineer, a doctor, a teacher, a businessman, and so on. Here, the individual is deliberately taught to think as predetermined by the educators. Thus, in a narrow sense, education is nothing but a purposeful activity deliberately planned for the optimum development of an individual's potentials. See concept and meaning of education. Education in the narrow sense does not include self-culture and the general influences of one's surroundings, but only those special influences which are consciously and designedly brought to bear upon the youngster by the adult persons of the community, whether through the family, the church, or the state. Thomas Raymond, 1906. Broader meaning of education. In the broader or wider sense, education is not limited to a classroom or a school only. It is considered to be a lifelong process, where all the experiences, knowledge, and wisdom that an individual acquires at different stages of one's life through different channels, that is, formally, informally, and incidentally, are termed as education. The broader view considers education as an act or experience that has formative or additive effect on the personality of an individual. It is believed that education is not only an instrument of social change, but also an investment in national development. Such a view of education encompasses all life experiences, as there is a shift in emphasis from individual development to national development. It is considered that education is a lifelong process that includes all experiences that the child receives in the school or at home, in the community and society, through interactions of various sorts and activities. The broader meaning of education implies the process of development wherein the individual gradually adapts himself, herself to various ways to his/her physical, social, and spiritual environments. Whatever broadens our horizon, deepens our insight, refines our reactions, and stimulates our thoughts and feelings educates us. Lodge. It is really life that educates us. Thomas Raymond, 1906. BA6 in Education. Learning. Check 1. 1. Analyze the views of Raymond on education. Education as process and product. There is always a controversy whether education is a process or a product. Mostly we consider education as a product. That is something that has been produced as a result of certain inputs, which in this case is instruction or experiences. In this sense, it is the sum total of what is received through learning the knowledge, skills, values that are the outcomes of learning. The concept of education as acquisition of knowledge was prevalent since the beginning of history of education. Many literature sources and the religious doctrines have propounded that knowledge is power and knowledge is virtue. Even now it is believed that knowledge leads to wisdom. Education becomes a product only when it assimilates the culture of any society and is transmitted from one generation to another. Education fosters values in people, which are universally accepted as valuable at a given point of time. Transmission of knowledge or skills which takes place as a purposeful activity in a variety of ways could be termed as the product of education. Education can also be referred to as a process. In this sense, education is referred to the act of developing the intellect, critical thinking abilities, social and cultural understanding, and understanding of one's own self. Education is considered as an active and a dynamic process which takes place continuously during one's life by way of various experiences through either in a formal or in an informal manner. The individual continuously learns. In this process, he or she learns to utilize one's experiences in learning new things and also to reconstruct new things in the place of old ones. Thus, the learning takes place throughout life, which is an active and a dynamic process. This dynamic process is nothing but education. So it can be said that education is a product as well as a process. Besides the above, education is viewed in various other ways by different philosophers and educationists. Some of them are given here in Activity 1 for you to explore and find out their meanings. ARC concept and the meaning of education. Activity 1. Discuss the following meanings of education by referring to the books cited in the reference list at the end of this chapter, or by going to the library. Education as preparation for life. Education as direction. Education is a lifelong process. Learning check 2.1. Explain the etymological meanings of education. 2. Why is the broad meaning of education preferred to the narrow meaning of education? 3. Education is considered as a dynamic and an active process. Explain. Concept and meaning of education. According to Indian thinkers, besides knowing the narrow and the broad meanings of education and various other interpretations, it may also be desirable to explore into the educational thoughts of great thinkers in order to get a deeper understanding of the concept and the nature of education. The great philosophers and thinkers, through different periods of human civilization, have attempted to define education and, in doing so, have reflected their own philosophical ideals and thoughts. Let us try to trace the educational thoughts of some of the great Indian thinkers whom you are familiar with. We shall also examine briefly how education was conceived in ancient times in India. Education in ancient India. In India, there is a rich tradition of education dating back to the dawn of human civilization, where the Gurukulas and Guru Shishya Parampara, teacher-disciple tradition, developed thousands of years ago. Two prominent words in Sanskrit stand out as equivalents of the term education. These words are shiksha and vidya. The former has been derived from the root word shas, meaning to discipline or to control. The latter, vidya, is derived from the verbal root word meaning to know. These meanings had their relevance, B.A.6 in education, to the purpose and the nature of education imparted in the ancient India. In ancient India, learning was pursued not for its own sake, but for the sake of and as a part of religion. It was sought as a means for the ultimate end of life, that is salvation. The main aim of education was training of the mind as an instrument of knowledge and the discharge of one's dharma, duty, or moral ethical value. Education was also conceived as the means to develop the physical and the subtle body, so that the inner spirit or the pure consciousness can express itself without getting hampered by the illusions of the world. In this context, it was felt that the purpose of education was to train and exercise the 5 Shis or layers: physical, gross body, vital, subtle body, mental, intellectual, and spiritual, in such a way as to make them the sound instruments for leading a good life. Kabir, 1961. However, the meaning and aims of education underwent a change according to the social, political, and the cultural conditions of different periods. For instance, education in medieval India was confined to the ideals and goals of life. The meaning of education has been visualized in different ways in the post-independence period by the Indian thinkers and educationists. Among the many great thinkers who have contemplated on the meaning of education, a few of them have been discussed here. Mahatma Gandhi. As you all must have studied, during the pre-independence period, the education system in India was governed by the British. The goals of education during British period were not akin to the Indian ways of thinking. The medium of instruction was English, which was foreign to many Indians. Mahatma Gandhi's interest in education was the outcome of a revolt against the British system of education that had many limitations and drawbacks. His educational thoughts emerged out of his own experiments with truth and nonviolence. According to Mahatma Gandhi, education not only molds the new generation, but reflects society's fundamental assumptions about itself and the individuals who comprise it. By education, he meant an all-round development drawing out of the best in the child's body, mind, and spirit. He stated that literacy is not the end of education and not see concept and meaning of education, even the beginning. It is only the means by which men and women can be educated. In his opinion, education should aim at developing self-reliance, where people learn to earn their livelihood. His aims of education also emphasized on character formation and all-round development, physical, mental, social, moral, aesthetic, and religious. According to him, education should make children ideal members of the democratic society. He wanted a school to be a doing and thinking school rather than a listening school. He emphasized on experiential learning through which the child acquires knowledge and utilizes it for the understanding and control of his social environment. He aspired that education should enable the child to relate what is learned in the school to the real-life situations. His concept of Bunyadi Talim, basic education, stresses on learning through craft, which favors the child belonging to the lowest stratum of society. Education through craft was felt desirable as it relieves the child from the stress of purely academic and theoretical instruction. The program of basic education was conceptualized in such a way that can bring about social transformation. Mahatma Gandhi believed in integrated education. He believed that the child has several innate potentialities which should be facilitated through educational process. He also believed that education should transmit the cultural heritage to enrich the human lives. According to Mahatma Gandhi, education has to be life itself and through life. I hold that true education of the intellect can come only through a proper exercise and training of the body, hands, feet, eyes, ears, nose, etc. In other words, an intelligent use of the bodily organs in a child provides the best and quickest way of developing his intellect. But unless the development of the body and mind goes hand in hand with a corresponding awakening of the soul, the former alone would prove to be a poor, lopsided affair. Mahatma Gandhi was a strong advocate of providing education to the girl child. According to him, the real difficulty is that people have no idea of what education truly is. We assess the value of education in the B.Ed.Course in education, learning. Check 3.1. What were the aims of education in ancient India? Are they relevant to the present system of education? Discuss in your groups. 2. How was education conceptualized by Mahatma Gandhi? Same manner as we assess the value of land or of shares into the stock exchange market. We want to provide only such education as would enable the student to earn more. We hardly give any thought to the improvement of the character of the educated. The girls, we say, do not have to earn, so why should they be educated? As long as such ideas persist, there is no hope of our ever knowing the true value of education. In Srivastava, 2003. Swami Vivekananda, 1863 to 1902, a great thinker and reformer of India, provides an insight into what education ought to be. According to him, education is the manifestation of the divine perfection already existing in man. The word manifestation implies that something already exists and is waiting to be expressed. The main focus in learning is to make the hidden ability of a learner manifest. Vivekananda believed that the system of education which existed at that time did not enable a person to stand on his/her own feet, nor did it teach him her self-confidence and self-respect. To Swami Vivekananda, education was not only collection of information, but something more meaningful. He felt that education should be man-making, life-giving, and character-building. The aim of education, according to him, is to manifest in our lives the perfection, which is the very nature of our inner self, which resides in everything and everywhere, which is known as Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Hence, education, in Vivekananda's sense, enables one to comprehend oneself within as the self everywhere. The essential unity of the entire universe is realized through education. Therefore, man-making relates to the harmonious development of the body, mind, and soul. In his scheme of education, great emphasis is laid on the see concept and meaning of education, physical health, because a sound mind resides in a sound body. Along with this, he pays special attention to the culture of the mind, power of concentration, and practice of ethical purity. In his opinion, education is not a mere accumulation of information, but a comprehensive training for life. To quote him, education is not the amount of information that is put into brain and runs riot there, undigested all your life. Education, according to Swami Vivekananda, means the process by which character is formed, strength of mind is increased, and intellect is sharpened, as a result of which one can stand on one's own feet. As regards education of girls, Vivekananda considered men and women as two wings of a bird, and it is not possible for a bird to fly on only one wing. So according to him, there is no chance for the welfare of the world unless the condition of woman is improved. Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo, a great philosopher and a nationalist who was born in 1872, contributed to education immensely. His educational ideas can be obtained from two basic sources: On Education, 1990, and A System of National Education, 1907. According to Sri Aurobindo, education is meant to bring out the best in man, to develop his potentialities to the maximum, to integrate him with himself, his surroundings, his society, his country, and humanity, to make him the complete man, the integral man. The purpose of education cannot be merely to create a literate individual or a highly informed person crammed with information and facts, or to create an individual to find a job. The more important aspects of an individual are his character, his personality, and his values. According to him, the process of education must be integral, aiming at the total and complete development of the individual. A strong, supple, well-formed, and healthy body, a sensitive, unselfish, and mature emotional nature, a positively energetic, vital, and enlightened mind, a wide-ranging and vibrant intelligence, a strong will, a balanced and pleasing personality, and the subtler spiritual qualities that can channelize, harmonize, and direct all the different parts of an individual into a life that is beneficial to the individual and to his fellow men. In short, Sri Aurobindo says that education should be integral, so that it develops the physical, mental, basics in education, vital, psychic, and spiritual aspects of the human personality. According to him, each individual and each nation have to develop according to their own individual characteristics, Swadharma. The desirable evolution of humanity is then facilitated. Sri Aurobindo observed that the then existing different education trends were inadequate for imparting true or integral education that takes the student to higher levels of consciousness. He proposed a method of education, that is, integral education, for achieving higher level of consciousness, which can radically and favorably change the social, economic, and political spheres of life. Education, which will offer the tools whereby one can live for the divine, for the country, for oneself, and for others. And this must be the ideal of every school which calls itself national. Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore was born in 1861 in Calcutta and was one of the early educationists of India, whose ideas gleamed through his various writings and educational experiments at Shantiniketan. As an alternative to the existing forms of education, he started a small school at Shantiniketan in 1901 that developed into a university and a rural reconstruction center, where he tried to develop an alternative model of education that stemmed from his own learning experiences. In general, he envisioned an education that was deeply rooted in one's immediate surroundings, but connected to the cultures of the wider world, predicated upon pleasurable learning and individualized to the personality of the child. He felt that a curriculum should revolve organically around nature, with classes held in the open air, under the trees, to provide for a spontaneous atmosphere. In his opinion, schools should not be factories, but should provide a free atmosphere for the pupils to have close contact with the nature and universe. To Tagore, the highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence. But we find that this type of education is not only systematically ignored in schools, but it is severely repressed. From our very childhood, habits are formed, and knowledge is imparted in such a manner, see concept and meaning of education, that our life is weaned away from nature, and our mind and the world are set in opposition from the beginning of our days. Tagore saw education as a vehicle for appreciating the richest aspects of other cultures, while maintaining one's own cultural specificity. Freedom, creative self-expression, and active communication with nature and man are the three cardinal principles of his educational philosophy. According to him, education should aim at the development of the active tendencies of the child. It should be for developing an individual into whole being. Education should also promote peace, love, kindness, and ideals, and should aim at gaining a sense of freedom and of sympathy with all humanity. Tagore considered education as essential need of human life. In his view, education is that social process by which man attains physical progress and spiritual wholeness. True education, according to him, consists in knowing the use of any useful material that has been collected, to know its real nature, and to build along with life a real shelter for life. Besides this, Tagore considered that God pervades in every particle of the nature, and felt that the ultimate aim of human life is to experience this spiritual unity, which is the supreme aim or function of education. ACTIMBBCD 2. Read the book on education by Sri Aurobindo and find out more about the integral education. Its means and implementation in the school started by him and the mother. Make presentations in your class. Find out about the kind of education practiced in Shantiniketan during Tagore's times. Yadu Krishnamurti, a philosopher and one of the 20th century's most influential teacher, devoted his life to the awakening of intelligence and transformation of society. Krishnamurti's interest in education was long-standing and always passionate. He addressed the nature of education in majority of his books, as well as in his speeches to the publics and students in India, as well as abroad. Krishnamurti's 1994 ideas on education, though radical, attempt to meet basics in education, the challenges of living at a profound level, and they do so at a time when such insights are desperately needed. According to him, modern education is unable to prepare students for the fundamental challenges of living. In his book titled Education and the Significance of Life, 1962, we see his concern for education and his views on right kind of education. According to Krishnamurti, the education system that exists is quite conventional. The educational system in practice now leads to conformity, where independent thinking is not possible. It produces the kind of human beings whose primary interest is to find security, to become somebody important, or to achieve some degrees and jobs. While discussing about significance of life, he propounds that as long as education does not cultivate an integrated outlook on life, it has very little significance. In his view, today's education has very little significance as it makes us subservient, mechanical, and thoughtless. Though it awakens us intellectually, it leaves us incomplete inwardly, stupefied, and uncreative. The purpose of education is not to produce mere scholars and professionals, but integrated men and women who are free from fear, for only among such human beings can there be enduring peace. To bring about the right kind of education, Krishnamurti emphasizes upon understanding the meaning of life as a whole. In order to achieve this, one has to be able to think directly and truly, but not consistently. Challenges of living at a profound level, and they do so at a time when such insights are desperately needed. According to him, modern education is unable to prepare students for the fundamental challenges of living. In his book titled Education and the Significance of Life, 1962, we see his concern for education and his views on right kind of education. According to Krishnamurti, the education system that exists is quite conventional. The educational system in practice now leads to conformity, where independent thinking is not possible. It produces the kind of human beings whose primary interest is to find security, to become somebody important, or to achieve some degrees and jobs. While discussing about significance of life, he propounds that as long as education does not cultivate an integrated outlook on life, it has very little significance. In his view, today's education has very little significance as it makes us subservient, mechanical, and thoughtless. Though it awakens us intellectually, it leaves us incomplete inwardly, stupefied, and uncreative. The purpose of education is not to produce mere scholars and professionals, but integrated men and women who are free from fear, for only among such human beings can there be enduring peace. To bring about the right kind of education, Krishnamurti emphasizes upon understanding the meaning of life as a whole. In order to achieve this, one has to be able to think directly and truly, but not consistently. He implies that a consistent thinker is a person who conforms to a pattern and repeats phrases and slogans. With this analysis about the education system and its narrowly determined goals, he views the function of education as not merely acquiring knowledge and gathering and correlating facts, but to create human beings who are integrated and therefore intelligent. In his view, intelligence is the capacity to perceive the essential, the what is, and to awaken this capacity in oneself and others is education. In his opinion, education should aim to help people to discover lasting and true values, which come with self-awareness and unbiased self-investigation, to help to break down the national and social barriers, as they breed antagonism and violence among human beings, and to awaken the capacity to be aware of oneself and not merely indulge in gratifying self-expression. A brief account of the educational ideas of a few Indian thinkers reveals that education is viewed differently by different people. The philosophical ideals of the thinkers. See concept and meaning of education. Activity 3.1. Read the book, Why Are You Being Educated? By J. Krishnamurti, which consists of 6 talks given by him in the Indian universities and at the Indian Institutes of Technology between 1969 and 1984. Make a list of questions that he asks students about education and their future. Discuss his views with reference to the existing educational scenario in our country. Is it possible to bring changes in our education system based on his views? Analyze. 2. Find out about Rishi Valley School run by Krishnamurti Foundations of Education. What are the educational practices followed in this institution? How does it differ from the other educational institutions? Explore the details and make a presentation followed by discussion. About life and the highest form of knowledge to be attained by human beings are reflected in their views on education. We find that Indian thinkers were against the narrow aim/vision of education and rigid pedagogical methods, which were teacher-centered. In general, we find that all the above thinkers have viewed education as an integral process, which helps in the all-round development of the individuals. What we need to understand is that these educational thoughts and concerns influence the educational aims and the educational practices in the society. The educational aims that are determined by the philosophical and the social perspectives, as well as by the national concerns and priorities in turn, determine the nature of educational processes right from curriculum construction to pedagogical practices. Learning check. 4.1. Why was Mahatma Gandhi opposed to the education system prevalent during the British rule? What kind of education he proposed and why? 2. What is the right kind of education according to J. Krishnamurti? 3. Explain Sri Aurobindo's concept of education. Rainer B. A6 in Education. Western Views on Education. Let us also trace some of the viewpoints on education in the West and try to find out how the present meaning of education evolved over a period of time. The viewpoints and the attempts to define education by several educational thinkers and philosophers have been synthesized collectively and discussed here under broad dimensions. Classical views. The various approaches to educational thought have been classified as conservative versus liberalistic, traditional versus modern, and so on. What we call as conservative position in education finds its origin in the educational thinking of Plato, a Greek philosopher, and his contemporaries. Many traditional philosophers, who were also the educational thinkers, believed that man is composed of body and soul or mind, of which mind is the knowing aspect of man's nature, while the body is the sensing and feeling aspect of her nature. This view asserts that only academic subjects are worthy of the name education. Any activities involving the body such as manual skills, crafts, and vocational preparation are not education, but training. This classical view asserts that on LLYI, the activities of mind designed to develop the rational part of the composed being are truly educative. The classical educationists also believe that human nature is everywhere and at all times essentially the same. Therefore, they held a view that the main purpose of education should be the same throughout the world, from which it follows that the formal curriculum in schools should be essentially the same, allowing some small variations to local needs and differences. This belief accounts for the emphasis placed upon developing the rational powers of man. According to this contention, education as a formal discipline needs to be imparted in the same manner to everyone. In such a situation, there is a very little scope of variation. The views of some of the classical philosophers in education are given in the box. Liberalist views in education, diametrically opposed to the classical views, was the position held by another group of philosophers in the 17th. See concept in a meaning of education. Activity 4. Analyze and discuss the following views on education in your groups. Socrates. Education means the bringing out of the ideas of universal validity which are latent in the mind of every man. Plato. Education is the capacity to feel pleasure and pain at the right moment. It develops in the body and in the soul of the pupil all the beauty and all the perfection which he is capable of. Aristotle. Education is the creation of a sound mind and a sound body. It develops man's faculty, especially his mind, so that he may be able to enjoy the contemplation of supreme truth, goodness, and beauty of which perfect happiness essentially consists of. In 18th centuries, which was the beginning of liberalism. Since the 17th century, the idea has grown that education should be directed at individual development for social living. Revolting against the mind-body dichotomy of the conservative educationists, this group held the view that true education is based upon the needs, interests, and the natural desires of the child. The child is viewed as an evolving organism constituted of the same elements as nature around him, and that the man is not everywhere and at all times the same, but is in a state of continuous change and development. Based on this, education was viewed as a continuous process which results in emotional development, social adjustment, physical well-being, and vocational competence. Some philosophers like Rousseau, Pestalozzi, Froebel, Basadau, and other contemporaries were the prime movers of this view. It was felt that the school's purpose should be broadened to include all facets of human development. They did not affirm that the school should not develop the intellectual powers of pupils, but they asserted that all the activities of human life are the concerns of the school. B.Ed.Course in education. Activity 5. Analyze and discuss the following quotations in your groups. Rousseau. Education of man commences at his birth. Before he can speak, before he can understand, he is already instructed. Experience is the forerunner of the perfect. Spencer. Education is complete living. Pestalozzi. Education is natural, harmonious, and progressive development of man's innate powers. Froebel. Education is unfoldment of what is already enfolded in the germ. It is the process through which the child makes internal external. Progressivist views. These views, propagated in the 17th and 18th centuries, grew somewhat slowly and took a better shape in the 20th century. Education reforms appeared in many guises in the opening decades of the 20th century. Progressive education came into focus with the renowned and reformed philosophers like Joan Dewey, Francis W. Parker, and William Wirt, who were also known as progressivists. Progressive education movement was influenced by the new scientific outlook and the empirical discoveries which were at their peak during that time. Thinkers like J.S. Mill, Spencer, John Dewey, and his followers reflected on the concept of education, influenced by the social and economic conditions, which shifted from the individual to group or collective freedom. It was felt that man's nature is social in origin, and hence the educational activities are of prime importance in making man of what he is. The educational institutions were viewed as the agents with the responsibility for not only making the social nature of the pupils, and also for the reconstruction of society itself. It was also implied that what the child is, or will become, depends upon society. Education is seen from the notion of individuals' free choice. Extending further, it was also felt that the education given by teachers who understand growth and development will somehow predetermine the person to make choices which are in harmony with nature. See concept and meaning of education. According to John Dewey, 1916, education is reconstruction or reorganization of experience, which adds to the meaning of experience and which increases the ability to direct the course of subsequent experiences. This view implies that the child already has acquired some experiences from his/her interaction with the environment, and education plays a role in reconstructing these experiences in the required direction in order to add meaning to those experiences. Let us take an example from your childhood experiences. Try to recall your idea about the Earth and the other celestial bodies when you were a child. Through your everyday observations, you must have felt that Earth was flat, and you are on the flat surface of the Earth, and the sun, moon, and stars move around the Earth. But after you joined the school and were exposed to the knowledge that the Earth is round, not flat, it is not the sun, moon, and stars that go round the Earth, but it is the Earth that goes round the sun. With proper scientific explanation by the teacher, supported by visuals, you must have changed your idea about the Earth, its motion, and your place on the Earth. This is what meant by John Dewey as a construction of experience that results in knowledge, which further helps in understanding subsec UNT to knowledge through subsequent experiences. Activity 6. Explain the following educational quotations given by John Dewey. How are they relevant to the present educational system? Support your responses with suitable illustrations drawn from school experiences and other informal contexts of learning. Education is a social process. Education is growth. Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. Analytical concept of education. In the 20th century, a group of educationists who were influenced by the analytical and linguistic philosophy analyzed the concept of education. Among them, it is noteworthy to mention the philosophical and educational thinkers like R.S. Peters, Flannery O'Connor, Paul Hurst, and Alfred North Whitehead. According to them, education, B.A.6 in education, is not a simple unitary concept, and it does not refer to any one particular process. For example, it is not a concept like gardening, which is a specific activity. It is like the concept or form. For example, if you are asked the question, how do you reform a person who has committed a mistake or a crime or disobeyed the rules? You may have different responses, like by punishing or by counseling or by making the person to repent and so on. From this, we understand that reform picks out to no particular process. People can be reformed by counseling, reading a religious book, by preventive detention, etc. Similarly, people can be educated by reading books, by exploring the environment, by travel, by having a conversation with others, and in the classroom as well. It encapsulates criteria to which any one of a family of processes must conform. As proposed by R.S. Peters, 1956, the logically necessary conditions for education are that it is concerned with the transmission of knowledge, which is worthwhile, and in which the transmission of knowledge is done in a morally appropriate manner. Each of these conditions is considered necessary to define what education is. They could not be merely contingent and, therefore, not present in a correct application of the concept. Taken jointly, they are said to be the concept of education. Education is also considered as a process of initiation, like saying that it is an activity rather than it is a concept or idea. You must have come across the cultural practices in certain communities of initiating the child into learning, which is celebrated as a ceremony, akshara abhyasa. In ancient India, the boy after a particular age was initiated into Vedic learning, which was called as Upanayana Sanskara. This practice of Upanayana is carried out even now in some communities. Even in some of the tribal communities, the male child, at a particular age, is initiated into the family occupation, for example, hunting, by the tribal leaders and family heads. Similarly, the above educational viewers, especially R.S. Peters, considered education as a process of initiation into what is considered as worthwhile for the child to learn. He extends his ideas further, saying that education involves essentially certain processes which intentionally transmit what is valuable in an intelligible and voluntary manner and creates in the learner a desire to achieve it. See concept and meaning of education. In sum, from various interpretations and views on education that have been discussed so far, we can say that education is a complex concept which does not refer to a particular process. It has been viewed variously, such as acquisition of knowledge, transmission of culture, drawing out and developing the best potentials in an individual, etc. By educating an individual, we attempt to direct him/her towards development of some desirable knowledge, understanding, skills, interests, attitudes, and critical thinking, etc. Through education, one develops proper understanding about the natural and social phenomena around and tend to live harmoniously. Education also helps one to develop certain essential skills like reading, writing, communicating, handling objects, decision-making, examining and analyzing things, group living, etc., that are required in one's day-to-day life situations. Education also helps in value and moral development of individuals. It helps one to be committed to tasks, goals, and positive desires, and pursue them intrinsically. Education refers to essential processes that are worthwhile to be transmitted, and which helps in change of attitudes and values toward the desirable ones. We shall look into what these essential processes are in the following sections. Activity 7. Collect the views of school teachers, of people belonging to other professions and of some community members on what education and educated person mean to them. Analyze their views with reference to what you have understood by education in this subsection. Learning check 5.1. Compare the classical views with that of the liberalist views on education. 2. What is the role of educational institutions, according to progressivists? 3. Why does John Dewey view education as a process of reconstruction of experiences? 4. Why is education not a unitary concept? 5. Education is a process of initiation. Explain. BA6 in education. WI Heather. E. Education. I. S. N. Actual or S. Oshel. P. Roses. Education as a natural process. In your experience as a student for so many years, you must have realized that all learning do not take place in a formal setting like a school or a college alone. You must have learned many things by observing nature and by interacting with people around you. So we all know that children learn to identify many things on their own from their surroundings, though later they learn to identify them with a name supplied to them with the help of parents or elders or teachers. Education is considered to be a natural process by some educationists. In their view, education takes place spontaneously in human beings through their experiences in nature. This view assumes that an individual develops or grows like a plant to become something that is presumed to be desirable. As a biological organism, the humans interact with the environment and gain experiences. These experiences lead to some sort of learning, which in turn results in the development of the individual. In other words, education becomes a lifelong process, and with every experience, the individuals gain an understanding of the self as well as of the environment. According to this view, education is not only preparation for life, but it is synonymous with life. Thus, education is concerned with imparting survival skills, developing the child's innate potentialities, making the individual fit for his/her environment, and socializing the child. Maria Montessori, a great educationist, stated that education is not what the teacher gives. It is a natural process spontaneously carried out by the human individual and is acquired not by listening to words, but by experiencing in the environment. In this context, the task of the teacher becomes that of preparing a series of activities spread over a specially prepared environment and let children learn through their observations, interactions, and tasks carried out. The process of education, which makes human beings successful in their respective environment, continues throughout life. Life involves a constant and continuous modification of experiences. As a consequence, the ideas, see concept and meaning of education, perceptions, skills, attitudes, and values undergo a change. This helps the child to adjust and accommodate to the fast-changing world. Educational adjustment of the child is further conditioned by the nature of demands of the society to which the child should be adapted and attuned. According to Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, a great philosopher, education is natural, harmonious, and progressive development of man's innate powers. It is believed that education consists in the development from within of potentialities rather than molding externally. It is also asserted that curriculum should arise from the needs and interests of the child rather than from the demands of the teacher. Self-expression is considered more important than mastering of the subject matter. Many of the Indian and the Western thinkers like Rabindranath Tagore, J. Krishnamurti, Rousseau, Froebel, and Montessori considered the education of the child in the natural environment where the child explores and learns through her experiences. The natural process of education consisted in preparing the most natural and life-supporting environments for the child and observing the child living freely in this environment. Though this view can be appreciated, we see that it suffers from certain limitations. It does not answer the questions like what are the worthwhile things that the individual would learn, which they can apply to their life situations, and what they can pass on to others, and what are the criteria by which we can say that they have achieved the required standards. There is no end to education. It is not that you read a book, pass an examination, and finish with education. The whole of life, from the moment you are born to the moment you die, is a process of learning. Krishnamurti, education is a natural process carried out by the child and is not acquired by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment. Maria Montessori, we have come to this world to accept it, not merely to know it. We may become powerful by knowledge, but we attain fullness by sympathy. From our very childhood, habits are formed and knowledge is imparted in such a manner that our life is weaned, basics in education, away from nature, and our mind and the world are set in opposition from the beginning of our days. Thus, the greatest of educations for which we came prepared is neglected, and we are made to lose our world, to find a bag full of information instead. We rob the child of his earth to teach him geography, of language to teach him grammar. His hunger is for the epic, but he is supplied with chronicles of facts and dates. Child nature protests against such calamity, with all its power of suffering, subdued at last into silence by punishment. Rabindranath Tagore, education as a social process. While some educationists felt that education is a natural process which takes place in the interaction between the individuals and the environment, there were others who felt that education is a social process, and one of the prime functions of the school is to help in the socialization of the child. Let us examine how education functions as a social process. Among all living organisms, you must have noticed that it is the man-child that depends on the parents for relatively a longer period for nourishment, shelter, and for learning basic skills. This prolonged childhood also helps the child to prepare herself better for adult life. During this period, the child learns the necessary skills for her survival in this world. Since human life is not only the result of biological and physiological functions, the child has also to get training in the intellectual, social, and cultural aspects of existence. It has to learn the norms and values of the group to become an accepted and effective member of the group. In other words, a child needs to be socialized, acculturized, and provided with knowledge and skills of survival together. Home is the first place where the child receives this education in an informal way. Later, school plays an important role as a formal agency to impart education. It exerts greater influence in educating the child, in addition to other social agencies like home, neighborhood, community, religion, media, etc. It is well known that human is a social animal, and this belief gives support to the concept of education as a socialization. See concept and meaning of education process. This is also derived from the philosophy that child needs to be educated in a desirable way. The process of education thus takes place in social settings, and society as a whole exercises great control over its process. Every society uses education as a means for promoting its own interests. While education is subjected to the control of society, it also influences society by contributing to its goals. Education performs a threefold social function by maintaining, transmitting, and creating social values, ideals, beliefs, and culture. For this purpose, education provides a learning platform for children to develop a variety of skills and other dimensions such as social interaction, emotional growth, physical awareness, awareness of life around us, and intellectual and emotional dispositions such as attitudes and values. The values, ideals, goals, mores, traditions, and culture of society are inculcated in a child through education in order to make him/her an effective member of the society. In fact, all education, beginning with family, has the task of socializing children and adolescents. The modern concept of education also gives importance to social settings in which interaction between the teacher and the taught takes place. But it is not enough if there is just an interaction between the teacher and the children. There ought to be an active interaction among children, as they learn quite a lot from each other's experiences. To understand that socialization of the child is a major social process of education, let us turn to John Dewey, according to whom all education proceeds by the participation of the individual in the social consciousness of the race. It means that any system of education that is devoid of social environment is not education at all. You have learned that education is initiating the child into worthwhile activities in the preceding sections. Socialization is the process of initiating an individual into norms of a group and into his own role or roles in it. Education as a social process does include initiation into the norms and roles of the society in general. Education is thus both a natural and a social process, wherein development of the uniqueness and individuality of the child is considered as the very essence of education, and B.A.6 in Education, Activity 7.1. Give illustrations to show how education received at home helps in the socialization process of the child. 2. Have you come across a school where education is treated as a natural process? If so, prepare a paper giving all details and share your experiences with the entire class. At the same time initiating him/her into the society for which school prepares him/her. The individual is means to an end, the end of perpetuating the social order in the socialization process, and the individual is an end by him/herself in the educative process. Learning check. 6.1. Identify the role of school in the socialization process of the child. 2. What role should the school play to make education as a natural and as a social process? 3. As a teacher, how would you contribute to the education of a child for socialization? W. Heather. E. Education is I, intentional, or U, nintentional. Most of our actions or work that we do is directed towards some goals. Let us take an example of you joining the B.Ed.C.Ed/B.A.Ed course. You must have joined with an aim of becoming a teacher in school. Some of you may be having an aim of pursuing your postgraduate course and then becoming a teacher. Most of our actions or decisions are geared by some intentions, which may be either at conscious or unconscious level. Let us examine what kind of a process education is, whether intentional or unintentional. Education is an intentional activity which necessitates achievement of some goal or the other. For example, when a man has lost something, he doesn't look outside, nor does he, see concept and meaning of education, produce something different from the activity he is engaged in. He tries to find out what he has lost. He achieves or attains the end, which is internal to the activity in which he is engaged. Similarly, education is intentional, which involves certain processes or tasks in which the individual gets engaged for a considerable period of time. Thus, it becomes intentional, goal-directed, or value-directed or normative. Education has instrumental, knowledge for practical ends, and intrinsic dimensions, knowledge for its own sake. For example, teaching carpentry is both valuable in itself and valuable as a means of increasing production of furniture or construction of houses. Similarly, the instrumental value is something extrinsic to education, while the intrinsic is valuable for its own sake. If a person is doing a particular course in order to get a job or to earn money, we can say that the person has an instrumental value. On the other hand, if a person is doing a course just for the love of the subject or wanted to learn more in that field, we can say that the person has an intrinsic value. A deliberate effort to plan educational activities such as curriculum, textbooks, school, etc. in order to bring in some changes in the learner in a desired direction is the instrumental dimension of education. There could be certain aims of education that have an intention of initiating every man and woman into the kind of educational activities which make them to take right place in the society. Develop vocational skills so that they become self-reliant, while there could be some aims to develop a thirst for knowledge for its own sake and to develop aesthetic sense in the individuals. Education suggests that not only what develops in someone is valuable, but also that it involves the development of knowledge and understanding. In learning at school, the practical ends besides the intrinsic ends are also important, as the learning situation is often geared to approval, passing exams and moving to the higher classes based on one's performance, and so on. The non-instrumental or knowledge for its own sake involves no exterior motive or intention or a purpose. The person in learning enjoys doing so, just for the sheer joy involved in it. BA6 in Education. Activity 9.1. Identify the various educational activities that are carried out in schools with a purpose. Analyze the purpose of the educational activities and their relevance in educating children. 2. Is it possible to have education with intrinsic values alone? Discuss and present your views in the class. 3. Identify the activities of schools that are non-instrumental. Though education is intentional, it is not a single-aimed activity. It has multiple aims which are directed towards the individual and national development. The imperative character of education for individual growth and development has been universally accepted. It encompasses teaching and learning specific skills and something less tangible, but more profound, that is imparting of knowledge, sound judgment, and wisdom. Education also takes upon itself the responsibility for striking a balance while developing these abilities, so that a harmonious personality becomes the outcome. As an individual in the society, one has to think critically about various issues in life and take decisions about them being free from bias and prejudices, superstitions, and blind beliefs. Education intends through its processes, develops in an individual the capacity for critical and analytical thinking, and changes his/her approach to life. It aims at awakening curiosity, stimulate creativity, develop appropriate interests, build essential skills, attitudes and values, and the capacity to think and judge independently. Education also intends to develop certain secular, democratic, and social values, thereby serving as the means of realization of nations' goals and ideals. According to the Education Commission, 1964-66, education must serve as a powerful instrument of social, economic, and cultural transformation necessary for the realization of national goals. W. Hat D. Oways E. Education C. Emprise of. With an understanding of the concept of education and its intentions, let us look into what education comprises. See concept and meaning of education. Of. According to R.R.S. Peters, 1967, education comprises of normative and cognitive aspects. It comprises of certain criteria by which we can explain the educative process. The normative aspect of education. Education develops appreciation for certain norms or standards. For example, how do you judge a person good in housekeeping? Is it not when good housekeeping meets certain standards, certain criteria to satisfy? Similarly, education has certain standards or criteria to be fulfilled. It consists of initiating others into A. Doing activities that are worthwhile, and B. Modes of conduct and thoughts which have standards written into them by which it is possible to act, think, and feel with varying degrees of skill, relevance, and aesthetic sense. Education has normative implications as it implies that something worthwhile is being intentionally transmitted in a morally acceptable manner. For example, can we say that a person is educated, yet there are no changes in his ways of thinking, attitudes, and behavior? It would be contradiction to say this. Therefore, there are certain norms or standards by which we call a person as educated. It also implies that the person has undergone some worthwhile activities that we call as educative processes. In this context, what becomes important is the task achievement or processes that are worthwhile and intentional, in which one is engaged in a morally acceptable manner. For example, you know very well that education involves teaching and instruction to some extent, yet one may not be sure whether all teaching results in education. Though it may or may not result in education, definitely, it is not morally objectionable. But when a person uses conditioning as a method to educate an individual, just like the ways animals are conditioned to certain behavior by rigorous training, then it is morally objectionable. So conditioning or indoctrinating might be ruled out as the only process of education. From the above, we may infer that educational practices are those in which people try to pass on what is worthwhile, as well as those in which they actually succeed in doing so. Success may be evident by some of the characteristics such as sense of relevance, precision, applicability of knowledge, power to concentrate, higher order of thinking abilities, and so on. BA6 in education, the cognitive aspect of education. Other important requirements describe education as the family of tasks. These are A, knowledge and understanding, and B, the cognitive perspective. Let us examine these characteristics in order to understand what education is in the total sense: knowledge and understanding. Let us go back to our earlier question: to whom do we call as an educated person? Do we call an individual as an educated person just because he has mastered skills in a particular area? Definitely, we do not call a person as educated who has mastered skills. Even though the skills he has mastered may be highly recognized in the society or highly prized, like engineering, dealing with machines, computers, etc. For a person to be educated, he should also have some body of knowledge and some kind of conceptual understanding to rise above the level of a collection of disjointed facts. This implies understanding of principles for the organization of facts, which enables an individual to apply what he has learned to his/her life situations. A merely informed person is not the same as a truly educated man or woman. For example, a person may be having a number of master's degrees and lots of information regarding his subject, but he/she may lack certain qualities needed to describe him/her as educated man. One must also know the why of things. Further, the knowledge acquired by the individual must not be inert. It means that the knowledge acquired should not be a dead weight or useless which cannot be applied. For example, the knowledge of science should not stop at the acquisition of scientific facts and procedures, but should enable the learner to look at the nature, earthly phenomena, the cause and effect relationships, the discoveries made, the speculations of man about life occurrences in the past, understanding the present in light of the discoveries made, and look into future possibilities about life on Earth and the universe as a whole. The knowledge acquired should also enable one to have better attitudes and approaches to life, rather than getting lost in unfounded beliefs, dogmas, and irrational thinking. This differentiates between a merely knowledgeable man and an educated one. Scientific thinking does not just mean see concept and meaning of education, knowing the evidence based on certain assumptions, but one should also know what counts as evidence and ensuring that it can be observed. Education also implies the kind of commitment that comes from being on the inside of a form of thought and awareness. It requires one to understand and to care for the internal standards of those thoughts, forms, and awareness. Without such commitment, one gets lost in the information gathered in the name of knowledge, and such person cannot be called as an educated person, whose knowledge is purely external and inert or useless. Cognitive perspective. A further requirement of education is what has been termed as cognitive perspective. This means that education must involve essential processes of knowledge and understanding and the holistic view of all aspects of situations that would enable one to apply the knowledge and understanding rather than being inert, deadweight, useless, and worthless knowledge. The cognitive perspective is linked with understanding, and there is no place for inertness, which is useless or worthless. For example, we can have knowledge which we understand, and we can make use of such knowledge in actual life situations. On the contrary, we can have knowledge which we cannot use it because we do not understand it, inert. A scientist may be good in his/her subject, very thorough with scientific principles, and yet does not see the interrelatedness in the field with rest of the things around, in the patterns of life in the universe. What he/she is lacking here is cognitive perspective. Such an individual cannot be really considered as educated. Education cannot be tied down into specific compartments and specialized skills, viz. Scientist, teacher, doctor, engineer, and so on. Education is concerned with the development of whole man and not just a part of him. Criteria of educative process. I. Education implies transmission of what is worthwhile to those who are committed to it. 2. Education involves not only knowledge and understanding, but also some sort of cognitive perspective, which stresses on interrelating the knowledge with the world around. A6 in education. Lower E, education must be carried out through procedures that uphold dignity and autonomy of persons, and secure and utilize their willingness, purposiveness, and capabilities. IV. Education is concerned with the development of the whole man, and each activity must contribute to it. R.S. Peters, 1967-1971, are on Activity 10.1. Identify the qualities of an educated person. What qualities do you expect an educated individual should have? 2. Read the UNESCO report on learning to be. Identify the points that describe the dimensions of education. Discuss their relevance to the criteria of education mentioned above. 3. Analyze the role of the school in satisfying the criteria of education. Educational processes. You have already seen that education does not refer to a single process, but to a family of processes leading to the achievement of being educated. It is therefore necessary to isolate the different aspects of being educated and consider which educational processes are of particular relevance. Training refers to the development of specific skills which are to be exercised in relation to particular ends or functions in accordance with the rules pertaining to the activity. Skills of reading, writing, and computations are some of the basic skills to be mastered before formal education can proceed further. A skill cannot be learnt instantaneously by just seeing somebody performing it. It requires a kind of drill or constant practice, especially under the supervision of the instructor or the teacher who is teaching the skill. The teacher who is teaching a skill also provides a model of the performance and corrects it to bring it to perfection. In this case, very little emphasis is given to the underlying rationale for performing, see concept and meaning, of education, a skill. For example, a person who wants to play music on an instrument cannot perform the skill unless he or she practices it constantly for a long period. Training also carries with it an application of the skill which is wider than mere learning of the skill. For example, while undergoing physical training course, a person not only learns the skills of doing exercises, games, and so on, but also learns good habits of keeping him/herself fit, healthy, punctual, eating right type of food, etc. Such learning cannot take place simply by imitating someone blindly. Training consists of a systematic series of activities involving instruction, practice, etc. to produce desirable habits or behavior in particular aspects of life or vocation, for example, military training, technical training, computer training, etc. Thus, training aims at developing and promoting specific skills in a chosen area with a view to make the individual undergoing training an expert in the field or task concerned. It is a kind of capacity building of an individual in a particular skill. Activity 11.1. What does the term training mean to you? 2. See and we call your course where you are taught to become a teacher as a training course. Discuss your meaning of training in the groups. List down the different types of training courses that you are aware of. 3. Discuss how training is different from learning. Learning check 7.1. Which part of your course has a training component in it? 2. Does training result in education? 3. Does education of a person involve training? Instruction and learning by experience instruction is a process which helps in the acquisition of knowledge. It is the means employed to bring about desirable changes in learners. Instruction involves communication of ideas, values, skills, information, and knowledge to the basics in education students. Instruction may also involve use of systematic and scientific methods of communication for effective transaction. Instruction aims at effective learning in individuals with a view to educate them. Thus, instruction becomes the instrument of educating individuals along with his/her educative experiences. In acquiring a body of knowledge, instruction serves as one of the means of providing experiences. This does not mean that a teacher has to make children sit passively in the class and give instruction. By nature, children are very curious to know things around them by directly observing or by exploring on their own. The teacher can facilitate their learning capacities by creating appropriate learning opportunities and be at hand when children ask questions. In this way, there can be no danger of instruction becoming a teacher-centered. Mere experience alone will not help the child to discover. To enable the child to do that, the right sort of questions have to be asked at the appropriate time, and his/her experience has to be guided in a proper direction. It is the task of the teacher to help and guide children in their knowledge exploration and development of skills and values. Understanding of principles. As you have already learned in the preceding sections, Understanding of principles does not depend upon accumulation of isolated bits of information and knowledge. Rather, it requires reflection on what one already knows and relating them to other facts and concepts, so that underlying principles between the facts and the concepts could be known. It should be noted that understanding of principles has no meaning unless one has acquired knowledge of the concepts. For instance, there could be no appeal to principle unless there is an experiential or direct knowledge of the concepts. In our daily life instances, we come across many natural and physical phenomena. When we look at them, we don't merely observe but acquire knowledge about them. We do try to see relationships among different events and also try to identify a common thread that runs across. We try to identify the principles that govern certain occurrences in nature. For example, when you understand the concept of a plant, you also try to understand the principle that governs, see concept and meaning, of education. The growth of the plant, why the roots of a plant always grow towards the ground, and why do the leaves and fruits fall down, and so on. In morals, similarly, principles are needed if one has to justify the human conduct. Therefore, the grasp of principle is not just acquisition of knowledge, but goes beyond it in stating the rules in the relationships. Logical and in stating the rules in the relationships. Logical and critical thinking. Logical in stating the rules in the in stating the rules in stating the rules in the relationships. Logical and critical thinking. Logical and critical thinking is one of the educational processes involving the purposeful application of cognitive abilities in order to attain more and higher cognitive structures and capabilities. Development of such higher cognitive processes in children is another important aspect of teaching. The responsibility of a teacher is to create learning contexts in such a way that the concepts and meanings are discovered, and at the same time a critical attitude towards them are also developed. Creating appropriate learning environment to develop logical thinking and critical thinking is a part of educative process. Further, mere passing on a body of knowledge or principles without any systematic attempt to explain or justify them does not constitute true education. Rather, it leads to indoctrination. Indoctrination means imposing the principles of a particular school of thought so as to create a faith in those principles in the minds of learners. You must have come across certain institutions or schools which impose their dogmatic beliefs and ideals on children without letting them to question or inquire into them. Education can never take place in an indoctrinated environment where the individuals are treated as mere objects, but not as thinking minds. Learning and teaching is the process of education. In this process, the teacher and the learner interact with each other, exchange thoughts and ideas, ask and answer questions, etc. In contrast, the indoctrination does not allow any reasoning or development of critical mindedness. Developing critical mindedness involves an attempt to explain and justify beliefs and practices, giving an opportunity to question the fundamental assumptions on which the beliefs are based, looking for evidences for belief, probing into presuppositions, and thinking in a clear, coherent, and rational way. The importance of critical thinking in a democratic society is basics in education, necessary for individuals to take right place in the society. In fact, the success of democracy rests on the individual's ability to think critically and not to be carried away by propaganda. Thus, development of logical and critical thinking constitutes another important aspect of educational process. Activity 12.1. Identify the extent to which skill development, factual learning, and scope for developing logical and critical thinking are attempted through curricular areas. 2. What kind of educational processes would you adopt in the following contexts? Students want to set up an experiment in science. Students want to practice computer skills. Students want to solve the mathematical problems. Students want to develop speaking and reading skills in English. Students want to know why the objects fall down when dropped from heights. Students want to know why ships do not sink, whereas the other heavier objects sink in water. Dort was education, O, culture only in educational, I, institutions. Where does education take place? If you ask this question to yourself or to others, probably you may get an answer from most of them that it take place in the institutions. Education does not necessarily take place only in institutions like schools, colleges, and universities. Education is often being confused with schooling, relying on the premise that time spent in school is directly related to education. Try to recall all that you have learned during your schooling days. It is possible that most of us have learned things even outside the school. In schools, we find that what one has to learn is predetermined, which may or may not be related to one's context. The experiences gained outside the school help in see concept and meaning of education, understanding the school content. Many times we came out with knowledge that is personally relevant and easily transferable to new situations. Many people have a strong belief that somehow spending time in school will make a person educated. This is one of the biggest misnomers that prevails throughout our society. Certainly, there are many wonderful, authentic, relevant learning experiences that take place in school at all levels. But that is not the only source of education. The process of education takes place in all personal and social situations. Education in this sense would certainly include all efforts for inculcation of values, attitudes, and skills that the society desires to be imparted to children. In contrast to this broader notion, education occurring in institutions like schools and colleges is an act of consciously imparting values, knowledge, and skills in accordance with the requirements in a formal situation. Schools and colleges also impart deliberate and systematic training in specialized subject areas that may not be otherwise gained through the informal process. In its essence, schooling is a limited educational exercise in terms of range of experiences provided. It is also limited to a specific period of human life, that is, from childhood till one leaves school, while the process of education continues throughout the life. We learn most from our surroundings, from our friends, and from other people who share our interests. Besides school, there are a number of institutions in the society which are the agencies of education, such as the family, the community, the temple, the church, etc. These institutions are also known as agencies of education. The processes of education in these institutions are deliberately planned with a continuous effort to give certain type of knowledge, skills, or attitudes. In the institutions like schools and universities, the knowledge is systematized and classified into subjects. Educational activities of a school are understood in terms of the subjects which are taught in it. The schools as the social institutions, in fact, are established with the presupposed objective of imparting knowledge, skills, and attitudes to the future members of the society as it is considered important for living in the society. In ancient India, we had institutions, basics in education, like Guru Ashrama, Gurukula, Vihara, Sangha, Pathasala, and Vidyapatha, which played a prominent role in the process of socialization and transmission of knowledge and rich cultural heritage of India. In the medieval period, we had maktabs, schools, and madrasas, colleges. It is during the British rule the concept of school system emerged in India. Education also takes informally outside the institutions. For example, we also learn through the library, the newspapers, the magazines, the mass media and interactive communication technology, interaction with learned people and others, etc. All these sources entail learning. Interacting with a farmer might lead one to acquire an understanding of what kinds of crops are grown every year in different seasons, how much is invested by the farmer for production of crops, how much does he profit from the production of crops, the hurdles faced by the farmer in marketing, etc. This learning takes place informally without any structured ways and means like curriculum, teacher or textbooks, or an institution. It opens wider possibilities of learning from others' experiences and get connected to the questions, issues, and feelings that are important to people. In contrast to this, education that takes place in the institutions is more formal and structured. That tends to take place in an organized manner with lots of instructional planning and support, which are deliberately planned. It must be remembered that there is some knowledge which is historical and rooted in certain social traditions and had been accumulated from generation to generation on which the community depends considerably for developmental purposes. The community depends upon the agency like schools for the transmission of such knowledge, skills, and values to children which may not be possible otherwise to learn everything through informal means. Besides, the school environment can also eliminate the unworthy features of the existing environment from influencing the children in developing unhealthy attitudes and values. The school has a duty of omitting things like the undesirable social issues such as discrimination, inequality, gender bias, communalism, etc. It is necessary to have a common core subject matter and values to have a unity of outlook upon a broader horizon, see concept and the meaning of education, than being confined to a small group norms and culture. The school as an institution coordinates the diverse influences of the various social environments from which the individual students come from and provides an educative environment in which the individuals interact, socialize, and learn those that are worthwhile. This would develop a common and balanced outlook to diversities in society, a critical and an analytical mind which applies rationally what is learnt to the life situations. Activity 13. Read the National Curriculum Framework, 2005. Analyze the ideas related to learning beyond the classroom and the schools. Learning. Check 8.1. Explain the role of a school as an institution in educating students. 2. What are the other possible things that the child learns from his/her environment before coming to school? Let us sum up. The word education is derived from two Latin words, educare and educere. The first one meaning to raise and to bring up, while the second one means to lead forth or to come out. The narrow meaning of education is confined only to a few specific, deliberate, planned influences that have a bearing on the development of the individual. However, education is much more than this. It is considered to be a lifelong process, which includes all the events, experiences, knowledge, and wisdom that an individual acquires at different stages of one's life, formally, informally, and incidentally. Education in ancient India was aimed at training of the mind as an instrument of knowledge in the discharge of one's dharma. The contemporary Indian thinkers linked it with the human and societal development. The Western view on education has also changed over time from it being the activities of mind to reconstruction and reorganization of basics in education experiences. Education is both a natural and a social process, wherein development of the uniqueness and individuality of the child is considered as the very essence of education, and at the same time initiating him/her into the society for which school prepares him. Education does not refer to a single process, but to family of processes leading to the achievement of being educated. Some of the processes are training, instruction, and learning by experiences, understanding of principles, and logical and critical thinking. Review questions. 1. Compare the views of Indian thinkers with Western thinkers on the concept of education. How did the concept of education undergo changes over a period of time? Explain with justification. 2. Analyze the following statement and give your interpretation. You do not educate a man by telling him what he knows not, but by making him what he was not. Ruskin. 3. Explain the concept of education as initiation. 2. Worthwhile activity with examples. 4. WH and are the criteria of education? Which are the criteria that you think are satisfied by schooling? Explain with examples. 5. Discuss the concept of educated man with reference to today's educational context. 6. Why education does not refer to a particular process. Justify your answer. 7. Which of the two is important, education as a natural process or education as a social process? 8. What kind of educational processes are important in developing an inquiring mind? Support your answer with suitable illustrations. 9. Does education take place through training and instruction? Justify your response with suitable examples. 10. Why does education comprise of development of critical attitude? Give reasons. See concept and a meaning of education. 11. What are the sources other than schools through which education takes place? Do those sources satisfy the criteria of educative process? 12. Explain the role of an institution in educating a person. What are the requirements of education that are satisfied in an institution? References wire further readings. Aurobindo S. 1990. On Education Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry. DUEJ. 1916. Democracy and Education, The Macmillan Company, New York. G. Oud C.V. ed. 1973. Dictionary of Education, 3rd edition, McGraw-Hill, Michigan. K. Abir H. Umayyan, 1961. Indian Philosophy of Education, Asia. Publishing House, Bombay. K. Raplani K. 1980. Rabindranath Tagore, A Biography. Viswabharathi, Shantiniketan. K. Rishnamurthy J. 1994. Education and the Significance of Life. Krishnamurthy Foundation, India. Emani R.S., 1996. Educational Ideas and Ideals of Gandhi in Tagore, a Comparative Study. New Book Society of India, New Delhi. National Council of Educational Research and Training, 2005. National Curriculum Framework, NCERT, New Delhi. P. R.S., 1967. The Concept of Education. Rutledge, Kegan Paul, Limited, Great Britain. P. R.S., 1971. Ethics in Education, George Allen and Unwin, London. R. Amond T. 1906. The Principles of Education, Longmans, Green and Company, London. S. Rivastava, IG, 2003. Compiler, Reflections of Eminent Indian Thinkers About Women, a Monograph. NCERT, DWS, New Delhi. T. Hoppen, E.M., 2006. Life at School. An Ethnographic Study. Oxford University Press, New Delhi. UNESCO, 1996. The Treasure Within Learning. Chapter 2 on Goals of Education, Structure. Introduction, Objectives,